"Come with me," the Navy SEAL said. When he saw the nurse and her German shepherd in the blizzard, Emily's sedan was a dead weight, half buried in a drift that felt more like concrete than snow. Her breath hitched in her throat, visible in the dying amber light of the dashboard. Beside her, Bear, 80 pounds of anxious German shepherd, whined low in his throat, his hackles raised not at the storm, but at the shadow moving through the whiteout. A fist pounded the glass. Emily jumped, her hand scrambling for the door lock, but the mechanism was frozen. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't introduce himself. He looked at the shivering dog, then at her terrified eyes, and extended a gloved hand. "Come with me," the Navy SEAL said, his voice cutting through the gale. "If you stay in this car, you're dead in 20 minutes. The cold was a physical blow, a heavy, suffocating blanket that instantly leached the heat from Emily's bones. She stared at the gloved hand hovering in the space between safety and oblivion. The stranger wasn't waiting for a debate. He stood with a wide, braced stance, leaning into the 60-mile-per-hour gusts as if he were part of the landscape, an immovable object amidst the chaos. "My dog," Emily stammered, her voice sounding thin and pathetic to her own ears. "I can't leave Bear." The man didn't flinch. He looked at the German shepherd, who had stopped whining and was now growling, a deep, protective rumble. The stranger lowered his goggles, revealing eyes that were a startling, piercing grey. He pulled the scarf down just enough to be heard clearly. "The dog walks. If he can't walk, I carry him. But you need to move. Now." There was no negotiation in his tone. It wasn't cruel. It was purely functional, stripped of any social niceties. It was the voice of someone who calculated survival in seconds, not minutes. Emily unbuckled her seatbelt. Her fingers were already stiff, fumbling with the latch. As soon as she stepped out, the wind tried to knock her flat. She grabbed the doorframe, gasping as the ice crystals scoured her face. Bear leaped out beside her, sinking to his chest in the snow, barking at the wind. The stranger grabbed her arm. His grip was like iron, stabilizing her instantly. He moved with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible in this weather, reaching into a heavy rucksack slung over his shoulder. He pulled out a length of carabiner-clipped rope. "Clip this to your belt," he ordered, handing her one end. He clipped the other to his own heavy tactical belt. "Visibility is 0. If you let go, I lose you. If I lose you, I won't find you until the thaw." "Who are you?" she shouted over the roar, clutching the rope. "Benjamin," he said, turning his back to the wind to check a compass mounted on his wrist. "We have 2 miles to the ridge. Keep your head down. Step where I step." Emily looked back at her car, a grey tomb rapidly disappearing under the white accumulation. Inside that trunk was her life, her suitcases, the few family photos she'd grabbed, the letter she hadn't opened. Leaving it felt like severing an artery. But looking at Benjamin's broad back, clad in a high-performance winter combat shell that looked worn and professional, she knew he was right. The car was a coffin. "Bear, heel," she commanded. The dog pressed against her leg, shivering but obedient. Benjamin glanced back, checking the connection of the rope. He nodded once at the dog, then turned into the teeth of the storm. "Let's move." The first 100 yards were agony. The snow was thigh-deep in places, a shifting landscape of treacherous drifts and hidden ice. Emily was fit. Years of 12-hour nursing shifts and trail running had given her endurance. But this was different. This was fighting the atmosphere itself. Every step was a battle of will. She watched Benjamin. He moved with a piston-like rhythm, breaking the trail. He didn't just walk. He stalked through the snow, constantly scanning left and right, though there was nothing to see but swirling white. He wasn't just hiking out. He was patrolling, Why is he out here? The thought nagged at her, fighting for space alongside the fear. This was a closed pass in the Bitterroot Mountains. No one drove this road in winter, certainly not during the storm of the decade. She had only taken it because she was desperate, because the main highways were too public, too easy to track. But him? He looked ready for war. Not a hike. A sudden gust slammed into them, knocking Emily sideways. She fell hard, face planting into the biting snow. Bear yelped, scrabbling for traction. Before she could push herself up, the rope went taut. Benjamin didn't just pull. He hauled her up with one arm, his strength terrifyingly casual. He didn't scream at her to get up. He just held her steady until she found her footing. "Check your extremities," he shouted close to her ear. "Wiggle your toes. Keep the blood moving." "I'm okay," she lied, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. He looked at her, really looked at her. For a split second. His gaze dropped to the bruise on her cheekbone, the one she'd tried to cover with makeup before fleeing Seattle. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dark passing through them, but he turned back to the storm without a word. 1 mile, he called out. It felt like a lie. But she followed him, the rope between them, the only lifeline in a world that had turned entirely hostile. Time distorted. Minutes stretched into hours, measured only by the rhythmic crunch of boots and the stinging numbness creeping into Emily's fingertips. The world had reduced to the 3 feet of space in front of her, and the broad, dark shape of Benjamin leading the way. Bear was struggling. The German shepherd was tough, but the ice balls forming between his pads were causing him to limp. Emily noticed it first, a hitch in his gait. "Stop!" she yelled, tugging on the rope. Benjamin halted instantly, dropping to one knee in a defensive crouch. Rifle. Was that a rifle? Shifting under his pack. He scanned the perimeter before looking back at her. "What?" "Bear!" she gasped, bending down. His pause. Benjamin was there in 2 strides. He knelt in the snow, pulling off a thick glove with his teeth to expose a bare hand. He reached for the dog's paw. Bear growled, a low warning rumble, flashing white teeth. "No, Bear, it's okay," Emily soothed, placing a hand on the dog's wet fur. Benjamin ignored the growl. He moved with a calm dominance, taking the paw firmly but gently. He used the warmth of his thumb to melt the ice impacted between the pads. Bear stopped growling, confused by the lack of fear in the stranger, and leaned into the touch. "He's bleeding," Benjamin noted, his voice flat. "Ice cut the pad. He can't walk on this much longer." "I can carry him," Emily said, though she knew she couldn't. Not in this snow. Benjamin looked at her, then at the dog. He stood up, unbuckling the bottom straps of his massive rucksack. "No, you carry the pack. It weighs 40 pounds. I carry the dog." "He doesn't like strangers holding him," she warned. Benjamin didn't reply. He crouched low, murmured something unintelligible to the animal, and scooped the 80-pound shepherd up into a fireman's carry across his shoulders. Bear looked startled, stiffening, but Benjamin settled the weight with practiced ease. "Pack," he pointed. Emily shrugged into his rucksack. It was heavy, dense with gear, smelling of gun oil and stale coffee. The weight forced her to lean forward, changing her center of gravity. "Move," Benjamin commanded. Even with the dog across his shoulders, he didn't slow down. They hit the ridgeline 20 minutes later, and the wind worsened. Here, exposed to the full fury of the Rockies, the gusts were strong enough to strip paint. The visibility dropped to inches. Emily was blind, stumbling, relying entirely on the tension of the rope at her waist. Then she saw it, or felt it, a vibration in the ground that wasn't the wind. Benjamin stopped abruptly. He dropped to a knee, the dog still on his shoulders. He remained perfectly still, like a statue carved from ice. "What is it?" Emily screamed over the wind. He held up a hand. Silence. Through the howling gale, she heard a sound that made her blood run colder than the blizzard. The distinct, rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of a rotor blade fighting the air. A helicopter in this weather? Benjamin watched the sky, his body tense. The sound grew louder, passing directly overhead, invisible in the clouds, but close enough that the downdraft mixed with the storm. It wasn't a rescue chopper. Rescue birds didn't fly in zero visibility conditions unless they had a death wish. As the sound faded, Benjamin stood up. The urgency in his posture had spiked. He wasn't just hiking anymore. He was escaping. "We need cover," he said, his voice tighter. "Now." Were they looking for us?" Emily asked, panic rising. "He found me," she thought. "He actually sent people to find me." Benjamin turned to her. The grey eyes were hard, calculating. "Not you," he said. He turned sharp left, off the trail, leading them down a steep, treacherous ravine filled with timber. "Watch your footing. If you slide here, you go over the edge." They descended into the tree line, the canopy of pines offering a small mercy from the biting wind. The snow was deeper here, softer. Emily's legs burned. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. She was running on adrenaline and terror. "There," Benjamin pointed. Ahead, almost invisible against a rock face, was the slant of a roof. A hunting blind. A ranger outpost. It didn't matter. It was walls. It was a roof. They reached the door, rough-hewn timber reinforced with iron. It was padlocked. Benjamin didn't hesitate. He set the dog down gently, stepped back, and delivered a single, devastating kick near the latch. Wood splintered. The door groaned but held. He kicked again, harder, and the frame gave way. He shoved the door open and ushered them inside. "In! Go!" Emily stumbled into the darkness, Bear limping in after her. Benjamin followed, slamming the broken door shut and jamming a piece of debris against it. The silence was sudden and deafening. The wind was reduced to a dull roar outside. It was freezing, dark, and smelled of dust and rodent droppings. But it was out of the wind. Benjamin slumped against the door for a second, his chest heaving. It was the first sign of weakness she'd seen. Then he clicked on a tactical light attached to his vest, the beam cutting through the dust motes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning the single room. "No," Emily said, though her entire body throbbed. "Who was in the helicopter, Benjamin?" He ignored the question, moving to a cast-iron stove in the corner. "Search the cupboards. We need fuel. Anything that burns." "Benjamin," she pressed, her voice trembling. "You said not me. Who are they looking for?" He paused, a piece of dry kindling in his hand. He turned the light toward his own face, illuminating the exhaustion and the jagged scar running from his jawline down his neck, disappearing into his collar. "People who want to make sure I don't come back," he said quietly. "Welcome to the Alamo, Emily." The cabin was small, a single room dominated by the wood stove and a rough sleeping platform. It was a survivalist's cache, likely forgotten or abandoned. Cans of beans were stacked on a dusty shelf alongside a rusted hatchet and a lantern with no oil. Benjamin worked with an efficiency that bordered on robotic. Within 10 minutes, he had a fire crackling in the stove, feeding it dry moss and split logs he'd found, stacked by the wall. The warmth began to bleed into the room, fighting the sub-zero chill. Emily sat on the floor, her back against the logs, Bear's head in her lap. She was checking the dog's paws again. The bleeding had stopped, but the pads were raw. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small tube of lip balm, the only medical supply she had on her person. "Smart," Benjamin said. He was stripping off his outer shell, revealing a black thermal tactical shirt that clung to a muscular frame. He moved stiffly, favoring his left side. "It's petroleum-based," she murmured, dabbing it on Bear's paws. "It'll protect the skin." "I know what it is," he said. He walked over, dropping his heavy pack with a thud. He sat on a crate opposite her, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his face. He began to unlace his boots. "You're hurt," she said. It wasn't a question. She was a nurse. She recognized the subtle guarding of his ribs, the shallow breathing. "Old injury," he dismissed, agitated by the cold. "You're lying." Benjamin looked up, freezing mid-motion. "Excuse me?" "I'm an ER nurse," Emily said, finding a scrap of courage. "I know the difference between chronic pain and acute trauma. You're guarding your left flank because you have cracked ribs, maybe broken, and you were favoring your right leg on the descent." Benjamin stared at her for a long moment, then let out a short, dry huff of laughter. It softened his face, making him look 5 years younger, less like a weapon and more like a man. "You noticed all that while trying not to die?" "Occupational hazard," she said. "Let me see." "I'm fine." "Let me see, Benjamin. If you have a pneumothorax building up, you're going to suffocate in your sleep. And then Bear and I are stuck here, alone with a corpse." He hesitated, then slowly lifted the hem of his thermal shirt. Emily drew a sharp breath. His torso was a map of violence. Scars, old and white, crisscrossed his skin, but the left side of his ribcage was a mottled canvas of deep purple and angry black bruising. It was fresh, days old, maybe less. "Who did this?" she whispered, reaching out but stopping inches from his skin. "A disagreement," he said, pulling the shirt back down, "with a snowmobile and a tree, before I found you." "That helicopter, not related to the tree." He leaned back, his eyes closing for a second. "We need to set ground rules. The storm is going to last at least another 24 hours. We have enough wood for maybe 12. We have 1 can of beans and whatever is in my pack. And then we make a break for the highway. It's 10 miles east." Emily hugged her knees to her chest. 10 miles in deep snow. It sounded like a death sentence. "Why are you really here, Benjamin? Seals don't just wander around the bitter roots alone in a blizzard." He opened his eyes, the steel returning to his gaze. "I'm on leave. Call it a sabbatical. With a tactical rifle and a combat loadout. I like to be prepared." He reached into his pack and pulled out a silver thermos. He unscrewed the cap, the smell of high-calorie protein shake filling the air. He took a swig and offered it to her. She took it, her hands brushing his. His skin was rough, calloused. "Thank you." "Why are you here, Emily?" he countered. "You have Washington plates. Your car is packed with everything you own. You have a bruise on your face that's older than the crash, and every time the wind howls, you flinch like someone is about to hit you." The thermos stopped halfway to her mouth. The warmth of the fire suddenly felt oppressive. She lowered the drink, looking at Bear, who was fast asleep, twitching in a dream. "I'm on leave too," she whispered. "Runners don't take leave," Benjamin said softly. "They retreat." "I'm not running." "Yes, you are. The question is, who are you running from? Because if they're persistent enough to chase you into a storm, they're dangerous. And if I'm going to protect you, I need to know the threat level." "Protect me?" Emily scoffed, a jagged sound. "You just met me. You don't owe me anything." Benjamin leaned forward, the firelight catching the hard line of his jaw. "I pulled you out of that car. That makes you my responsibility. That's how it works. Nobody gets left behind." "It's my husband," she blurted out. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, breaking the dam she'd built for 3 years. Ex-husband, he He's a cop, a dirty one. He said if I ever left, he'd find me. He said he has friends everywhere." The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Benjamin watched her, his expression unreadable. He didn't offer pity. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He just nodded, as if filing the information away into a tactical assessment. "A cop," he repeated. "Local? Seattle PD narcotic unit. Connected?" "Very." Benjamin stared into the fire. "Well," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming something lethal and quiet. "He's not the only one with friends." Suddenly, Bear's head snapped up. The dog scrambled to his feet, ignoring his sore paws, and let out a vicious, snarling bark directed at the door. Benjamin was moving before the echo faded. He snatched the rifle from beside his pack, racking the bolt. He killed the flashlight, plunging the room into the dim orange glow of the stove. "Get away from the door," he hissed. "Get in the corner. Cover the dog." "What is it?" Emily whispered, terror clawing at her throat. "Someone is outside," Benjamin said, aiming at the splintered wood. Through the howling wind, Emily heard it, the heavy, unmistakable crunch of boots on snow, right outside the wall. Then, the doorknob jiggled. The lock rattled. "Hello?" a voice called out. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a rescuer. The voice was high, erratic, and laughing. "Little pigs, little pigs, let us in." Benjamin's finger tightened on the trigger. He looked at Emily, his eyes promising violence. "Stay down," he commanded. The door burst open. The door didn't just open. It exploded inward, driven by a boot with the force of a battering ram. Splinters of ancient timber sprayed the room like shrapnel. Benjamin didn't fire. Not yet. The figure that loomed in the threshold was a silhouette against the swirling white void outside, backlit by the tactical strobe of a weapon-mounted light. The beam cut through the gloom, blindingly bright, sweeping the room in erratic, strobe light jerks. "Here, doggy, doggy!" the voice jeered, stepping over the threshold. The intruder was clad in expensive, high-altitude winter gear, white camouflage, professional grade. Bear lunged. It was a blur of motion. The German shepherd launched himself from the corner, a tawny missile of rage. The intruder cursed, swinging the barrel of his rifle down, but Bear was too fast, clamping his jaws onto the padded forearm of the man's coat. The rifle discharged. Crack, a deafening sound in the small space. The bullet blew a hole in the floorboards inches from Emily's foot. She screamed, scrambling back, pressing herself into the rough logs of the wall. Benjamin moved in the chaos. He didn't charge. He slid. He dove low across the floorboards, coming in under the intruder's guard while the man was distracted by the 80-pound dog attached to his arm. Benjamin's shoulder drove into the man's knee with a sickening crunch of cartilage. The intruder went down hard, the rifle skittering across the floor. Bear was shaken loose, snarling, ready to re-engage. But Benjamin was already on top of the man. It wasn't a fight. It was a neutralization. Benjamin's movements were precise, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. A fist to the throat to cut off air, a knee to the solar plexus, and then the flash of a knife drawn from a sheath on his chest rig. "Don't move," Benjamin growled, the blade pressed against the soft fabric covering the man's carotid. "Call off the dog, Emily, now!" "Bear house! Down!" Emily shrieked, her voice cracking. The dog froze, panting, standing over the tangled men with hackles raised, drool and blood, not his, dripping from his muzzle. Benjamin ripped the goggles off the intruder's face. The man beneath was younger than Benjamin, pale, with wild, dilated pupils and a smear of blood on his chin. He wasn't military. He had the manic energy of a junkie or a hired gun who enjoyed his work too much. "Who sent you?" Benjamin demanded, pressing the knife tip just enough to dent the skin. The man wheezed, grinning through bloody teeth. "The ghost wants his due, Benny. You think you can steal the ledger and just go skiing? The ledger, Emily whispered. The word hung in the air, heavy and confusing. Benjamin's face hardened into a mask of stone. He shifted his grip. How many with you? Enough, the man rasped. He tried to reach for a radio clipped to his vest. Benjamin slammed his wrist into the floorboards. They heard the shot! They're coming! You're dead already. Benjamin looked at the radio. Static hissed from it, followed by a voice. Echo 1, report. We heard a discharge. Status? Benjamin stared at the man for a split second, a calculation running behind his grey eyes. Then he grabbed the radio, ripped it off the vest, and smashed it against the cast-iron stove. He grabbed the intruder by the collar, hauling him up and shoving him toward the open door. Get out. The man stumbled, looking confused. What? You have no weapon. Your knee is blown. You have maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia sets in. Start walking back to your friends. You're letting me go? The man laughed, a high, disbelief-filled sound. You've gone soft. I'm not letting you go, Benjamin said, his voice devoid of emotion. I'm using you as bait. They'll stop to help you. That buys us time. He shoved the man hard into the snowbank outside. Run! The intruder scrambled up, limping heavily, and disappeared into the howling white. Benjamin slammed the broken door shut again, wedging a heavy crate against it. He turned to Emily. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline dump leaving him pale. A fresh stain of blood was blooming on the side of his thermal shirt. We have to move, he said, reaching for his boots. Now? Emily asked, her eyes wide. In this? You said the storm. The situation has changed, Benjamin cut her off, lacing his boots with trembling hands. They know exactly where we are. That gunshot was a beacon. If we stay here, we're boxed in. We have to disappear into the noise. Emily looked at the warm stove, the only comfort she had known for hours. Leaving it felt like suicide. Benjamin, you're bleeding again. And Bear, his paws. Benjamin stood up, swaying slightly before locking his knees. He grabbed his pack. Emily, look at me. She looked. His eyes were no longer just hard. They were desperate. These men, they aren't cops. They aren't soldiers. They're contractors, cleaners. They will burn this cabin down with us inside just to save the bullets. We leave now, or we die here. It's binary. Emily swallowed the lump of terror in her throat. She looked at Bear. The dog seemed to sense the shift in energy. He nudged her hand. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The darkness was absolute. Whatever light had existed during the day had been swallowed by the night and the storm. The world was a void of screaming wind and stinging ice. Benjamin didn't use a flashlight. He said it would make them a target. Instead, he navigated by memory and the faint, ghostly luminescence of the snow itself. They were tethered together again. This time, the rope felt less like a lifeline and more like a shackle dragging Emily through hell. They had been walking for 3 hours, or maybe 3 days. Emily couldn't tell. Her mind had retreated into a primitive state, focusing only on the mechanics of movement. Lift boot, step, sink, pull, repeat. Bear was struggling. The deep snow meant he had to hop-bound to keep up, expending massive amounts of energy. Twice, Benjamin had stopped to carry the dog for short stretches, despite his own injuries, until Emily forced him to put Bear down, terrified the exertion would kill him. "Hold up!" Benjamin's voice was a croak over the wind. He pulled her into the lee of a massive boulder, a small pocket of dead air protected from the gale. They collapsed into the snow. Emily huddled against Bear, sharing his warmth. Benjamin leaned against the rock, sliding down until he was sitting. He fumbled with his pack, pulling out a chem light. He cracked it, shielding the glow with his body. The eerie green light illuminated his face. He looked like a corpse. His skin was grey, his lips blue. "Hydrate," he ordered, handing her the thermos. It was lukewarm now, but it was liquid. Emily drank, then forced the rim to Benjamin's lips. "You too." He took a sip, then coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Emily's nurse instinct scream. "Benjamin," she said, leaning close. "Talk to me. Keep yourself awake. What is the ledger?" He closed his eyes, his head lolling back against the rock. "Not money. Names. Roots. Evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Treason," he whispered. "High-grade, state-sponsored treason. I was part of a security detail. Private sector. High pay, low questions. I thought we were guarding oil execs. Turned out we were guarding the guys selling components to the wrong people." "And you stole the proof?" "I didn't steal it. I just didn't give it back when the principal died. I took it as insurance. Thought it would keep me safe." He laughed, a grimace of pain. "Stupid. No such thing as safe." Emily stared at him. He was a fugitive, a whistleblower. "So, the sabbatical?" "I was coming to the cabin to hide it, bury it, then disappear." He opened his eyes, looking at her. "Then I saw a car in a snowbank, and a girl with a dog." "You should have kept walking," she said softly. "Maybe." He reached out, his gloved hand brushing the snow from her hood. But then who would have carried the dog? A comfortable silence settled between them, strange in its intimacy amidst the violence of the storm. "My husband," Emily said, filling the quiet. "He isn't just a dirty cop. He's possessive, pathologically. He broke my arm 2 years ago because I talked to a male barista. I stayed because he threatened to kill Bear. He said he'd put him down as a dangerous animal, and there was nothing I could do." Benjamin's hand tightened into a fist. "People like that. They rely on fear. They rely on you feeling small." "I am small," Emily admitted. "Look at us. We're freezing to death in a blizzard." "You're not small," Benjamin said fiercely. "You walked out of that house. You drove into a storm rather than stay. You're sitting here, 10 miles from nowhere, keeping me alive. That's not small, Emily. That's survival." He tried to sit up straighter but winced, clutching his side. "The tracker. Silas. He won't stop, but the snow is covering our tracks. If we make the ravine before dawn, we lose them. And if we don't have that luxury." He tried to stand, but his leg buckled. He fell back with a groan. "Benjamin!" Emily scrambled to him. "I'm good," he gritted out. "Just give me a second." "Your ribs," she said, her hands moving over his tactical vest. "And your leg. You're running on fumes." "I can walk," he insisted. "No," Emily said firmly. She stood up, fighting the wind. "You can't lead. You're too hurt. I'm taking point." Benjamin looked up at her, the green light casting shadows in his hollow cheeks. "You don't know the way." "You have a compass," she said, pointing to his wrist. "Give me a bearing. I'll break the trail. You step where I step, just like you told me." He hesitated, his pride warring with his logic. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Bearing 090. Due east. Keep the wind on your left shoulder." Emily nodded. She clipped the rope to her belt, then turned to face the black wall of the storm. She was terrified. She was exhausted, but for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't helpless. "Come on, Bear," she called out. "Let's go for a walk." Dawn didn't break. It bled into existence. The sky turned a bruised purple, then a sullen grey. The wind finally began to die down, dropping from a scream to a mournful moan. The silence that followed was unnerving. Emily stood at the edge of the world, or at least That's what it felt like. They had reached the ravine Benjamin had aimed for, but the storm had changed the landscape. The narrow stone bridge, a natural arch of rock that spanned the chasm, was coated in a thick, treacherous layer of verglas ice. Below, 300 feet down, a river churned, black water cutting through the white snow. "That's it," Benjamin rasped. He was leaning heavily on a makeshift walking stick he'd cut from a sapling hours ago. He looked terrible. His skin was waxy, and his eyes were glassy with fever. The highway is 2 miles past that gorge. Emily stared at the bridge. It was maybe 4 feet wide, no rails, covered in ice. "We can't cross that. It's a skating rink." "It's the only way," Benjamin said. "If we go around, it adds 6 miles. I can't do 6 miles, Emily." He swayed, catching himself. He was right. He was fading. If they didn't get to help soon, the infection or the internal bleeding would kill him. "Okay," Emily breathed. "Okay, we crawl." "Bear first," Benjamin said. "If he panics halfway, he won't." Emily knelt by the dog. Bear was shivering, his paws raw and bloody despite the balm. "Bear, look at me. Stay close." They moved out onto the arch. The wind, though weaker, was still dangerous here in the open gap. It buffeted them, threatening to shove them into the abyss. Emily went first, on her hands and knees, chipping at the ice with a rock to create handholds. Benjamin followed, dragging himself. Bear was between them, low to the ground, whining softly. Halfway across. The drop was dizzying. The sound of the river below was a low roar. Crack! The sound came from the cliffs behind them. Not ice cracking. A gunshot. A bullet chipped the rock face 3 feet above Emily's head, sending stone dust into her eyes. "Move!" Benjamin roared, adrenaline momentarily overriding his collapse. Emily scrambled forward, slipping, her knees banging hard against the ice. She looked back. On the ridge they had just left, 3 figures stood. They were small in the distance, but the scopes on their rifles brought them uncomfortably close. Another shot rang out. This one hit the bridge itself, sending a spiderweb of cracks through the ice near Bear's paws. The dog panicked. Bear scrabbled, his claws useless on the glaze. He slipped sideways, his hind legs going over the edge. "Bear!" Emily screamed, lunging for him. She grabbed his collar just as he went over. The weight of the dog yanked her forward. She slammed onto her stomach, her upper body hanging over the abyss, holding 80 pounds of terrified German shepherd by a leather strap. "Emily!" Benjamin shouted. He was 10 feet behind her, exposed to the shooters. "I can't pull him up!" she cried, her muscles screaming. The dog dangled, twisting in the air, whimpering. Bullets pecked at the stone around Benjamin. He had a choice. Cover. Or her. He didn't hesitate. He ignored the fire coming from the ridge. He crawled forward, ignoring the agony in his ribs, dragging himself over the ice. He reached Emily, grabbing her belt with one hand to anchor her, and reaching down with the other. "Grab my arm," he yelled at the dog, though Bear couldn't understand. Benjamin reached down, grabbing the scruff of the dog's neck. With a roar of effort that sounded like it tore something loose inside him, Benjamin heaved. Emily pulled. Bear scrambled up, claws gouging Benjamin's arm, and flopped onto the ice, shaking. "Go!" Benjamin shoved Emily forward. "Get off the bridge." They scrambled the last 20 yards, sliding into the cover of the boulders on the far side, just as a volley of rounds chewed up the spot where they had been. Safe. For the moment. Emily collapsed against the rock, gasping for air. She looked at Benjamin. He was lying on his back, staring up at the grey sky. He wasn't moving. "Benjamin?" She crawled to him. His eyes were open, but unfocused. There was blood on his lips. "Benjamin!" She slapped his cheek, hard. He blinked, focusing on her slowly. Did the dog make it?" "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, he's here. We made it." Good, he whispered. Good. He tried to sit up, but failed. Emily, leave me. Shut up, she snapped, checking his pulse. It was thready. Fast. We are 2 miles from the highway. You are walking, or I am dragging you, but you are not dying on this rock. They're crossing, Benjamin said, tilting his head toward the bridge. Emily peered around the boulder. The 3 figures were moving onto the ice arch. They were moving carefully, but they were coming. She looked at Benjamin's pack. The rifle was there. She knew how to shoot. Her father had taken her hunting, but she had never fired at a person. She looked at Benjamin, broken and bleeding for her. She looked at Bear, licking his raw paws. She looked at the men coming to kill them. Emily reached for the rifle. It was heavy, cold steel. She pulled the bolt back, checking the chamber like she'd seen Benjamin do. Show me, she said, her voice trembling but hard. Show me how to use the scope. Benjamin looked at her, a mixture of sorrow and pride in his eyes. He reached up, guiding her hands. Shoulder strict, cheek weld. Exhale. Squeeze between heartbeats. Emily propped the rifle on the rock. She looked through the glass. The crosshairs danced, then settled on the lead figure, the man in the white camo. I can't, she whispered. You don't have to kill him, Benjamin murmured, his hand on her shoulder. Just stop him. Break the ice. Emily lowered the aim. She targeted the center of the bridge, right where the ice was thinnest, right in front of the lead man. She exhaled. She squeezed the trigger. The world narrowed down to the crosshairs and the rhythmic pounding of Emily's own heart. She didn't look at the man in the white camouflage. She looked at the ice beneath his boots. It was a sheet of verglas, translucent and flawed, suspended over a 300-foot drop. She didn't hear the wind anymore. She didn't feel the cold. There was only the reticle and the trigger. Squeeze. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, a physical punch that surprised her. The sound was a flat, ugly crack that echoed endlessly in the ravine. Through the scope, she saw the impact. The bullet didn't hit the man. It struck the center of the arch, right where the stress fractures of the freeze-thaw cycle were most visible. A spiderweb of white lines instantly bloomed outward, racing across the surface like lightning. The mercenary froze. He looked down, realized his mistake, and tried to step back. Too late. With a sound like a thunderclap, the bridge disintegrated. Tons of ice and rock gave way, surrendering to gravity. The mercenary didn't scream. He just vanished into the white plume of falling debris. The other 2 figures on the far ridge scrambled back, throwing themselves prone as the edge of the cliff crumbled away. The chasm was now a gaping, impassable mouth. Emily lowered the rifle, her breath coming in jagged gasps. She stared at the empty space where a man had stood seconds ago. Nausea roiled in her stomach, hot and acidic. Good shot, Benjamin whispered. The sound of his voice snapped her back to reality. She turned. He was trying to push himself up, but his arms were shaking so badly they collapsed under him. His face was grey, the skin tight against his skull. The blood on his thermal shirt had frozen into a dark, stiff crust, but fresh red was seeping around the edges. We have to move, Emily said, her voice sounding hollow. They can't cross, but they can still shoot. Radio, Benjamin rasped. They'll call air support, or a ground team, on the highway. The highway is 2 miles, Emily said, slinging the heavy rifle over her shoulder. She grabbed his good arm. Up, now! It took 3 tries to get him standing. He was dead weight, a wall of muscle that had simply shut down. When he was finally upright, he leaned heavily on her, his breathing wet and ragged. Leave me, he mumbled again, eyes unfocused. Take the drive, in my vest, run. I am not leaving you, Emily hissed, grabbing his belt to stabilize him. I didn't just blow up a bridge to walk away alone. Move your feet, Benjamin. That's an order. He looked at her, a flicker of lucid surprise in his eyes. He nodded, once. Yes, ma'am. They moved into the timber, away from the exposed rim of the gorge. The snow was waist-deep here, untouched and pristine. Every step was a battle. Emily broke the trail, using her body as a plough, pulling Benjamin in her wake. Bear trailed behind them, limping, stopping every few yards to look back at the ravine, guarding their rear. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a crushing fatigue. Emily's legs burned with lactic acid. Her fingers inside her gloves were numb stumps. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. If they stopped, the cold would claim them in minutes. "Talk to me," she demanded, needing the noise to keep the panic at bay. "Tell me about the ledger. Who is the ghost?" Benjamin stumbled, catching himself on a pine tree. He coughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Ghost isn't a person. It's a program. Off-book. Intelligence. Selling assets to the highest bidder." "And you found out?" "I was the asset," he whispered. "We all were." He sagged, sliding down the trunk of the tree. "No, no, no!" Emily grabbed him, slapping his face. "Don't you dare close your eyes! Benjamin!" He looked at her, his gaze drifting. "You have pretty eyes, Emily. Sad, but pretty. Benjamin, get up." "Can't," he slurred. "Legs gone. Ribs. Punctured the lung. I can feel it bubbling." Emily pressed her ear to his chest. The sound was terrifying, a wet, crackling rattle with every breath. He was drowning in his own blood. She looked around the forest. It was huge, indifferent, and empty. There was no help coming. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "Okay, if you can't walk, we slide." She unzipped his heavy tactical jacket. "What doing?" he mumbled. "Making a sled," she said, teeth chattering. She wrestled the jacket off him, leaving him in the thermal shirt for a terrifying 30 seconds, while she zipped the jacket back up, empty. She laid it on the snow, tying the sleeves together to form a handle. "Sit on it," she ordered, maneuvering him. It wasn't a sled. It was a desperate, friction-heavy drag bag. But it was better than carrying him. She grabbed the tied sleeves, wrapped them around her waist, and leaned forward. "Mush," Benjamin whispered, a faint smile touching his lips before his head lolled back. Emily pulled. The weight was immense. She gritted her teeth, tears freezing on her cheeks, and took a step. Then another. She dragged the Navy SEAL through the heart of the blizzard, one agonizing yard at a time. The forest thinned. The relentless grey of the trees gave way to a wider, white expanse. A road. Emily dropped to her knees, sobbing with relief. It was the highway, covered in 2 feet of snow, unploughed but unmistakable. The cut of the tree line, the guardrail peeking out from a drift. It was civilization. She checked Benjamin. He was unconscious, his skin cold to the touch. His pulse was a flutter, barely there. "We made it," she whispered, shaking him. "Benjamin, we're at the road. We just need a car. Someone has to come." She dragged him to the lee of the guardrail, propping him up. Bear curled against Benjamin's chest, whining, trying to share his warmth. Emily stood in the middle of the road, the rifle still slung over her shoulder, looking east and west. Nothing but swirling white. The storm was breaking, the clouds lifting to reveal jagged peaks, but the road was dead. Then she heard it. The rumble of an engine. It was coming from the west, the direction they had come from, but by road. A heavy diesel growl. Emily waved her arms, screaming, though her voice was a croak. "Here! Over here!" Headlights cut through the gloom. A massive black shape emerged from the snow. A heavy-duty truck, lifted, with a plough blade on the front and a light bar on the roof. It wasn't a state plough. It was a private rig, matte black, aggressive. The truck slowed, tires crunching on the packed snow, and came to a halt 20 feet from her. Emily ran toward it, relief flooding her system. "Help, please! I have a wounded man!" The driver's door opened. A boot hit the snow. Emily skid to a halt. The blood froze in her veins. The man who stepped out wasn't a stranger. He was tall, wearing a sheepskin-lined deputy's jacket, his face handsome in a sharp, predatory way. He wore aviator sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. "Hello, Em," Mark said. Emily stepped back, her hand instinctively going to the strap of the rifle. "Mark?" Her ex-husband smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It never did. "I told you not to leave Seattle, Emily. I told you it wasn't safe out there for a girl alone." "How?" Emily's mind reeled. "How did you find me?" "I'm a detective, sweetheart, and you drove a car with OnStar." He took a step forward, his gaze flicking to the rifle on her shoulder, then to the unconscious man by the guardrail. "Who's your friend? He looks worse for wear." "He's a Navy SEAL," Emily said, her voice shaking. "He needs a hospital. Call it in, Mark. Please." Mark laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He reached into his jacket. Emily flinched. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes, lighting one with calm deliberation. "A SEAL, huh? That explains the mess back at the cabin. My friends were very impressed. They said he fought like a demon." The world tilted on its axis. "Your friends?" Emily whispered. Mark took a drag, blowing smoke into the frigid air. "The ghost pays better than the department, Em. A lot better." When the call went out that a courier had gone rogue in the Bitterroots, and I saw your car pinging on the pass, well, talk about two birds with one stone. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it with his boot. "Give me the drive, Emily, and the dog, and get in the truck." "No," Emily said. Mark stopped. He looked at her, genuinely surprised. "Excuse me?" "No," she said louder. She swung the rifle off her shoulder. It was heavy, clumsy in her hands, but she leveled it at his chest. "You aren't touching him. You aren't touching Bear." Mark sighed, shaking his head. He opened his jacket, resting his hand on the service pistol at his hip. "Put the toy away, Emily. You don't have it in you. You're a nurse. You fix people. You don't break them." "I broke a bridge an hour ago," she said, her voice hardening. "Try me." Mark's eyes narrowed. "I'm going to count to 3. If you don't drop that rifle, I'm going to put a bullet in your dog. Then I'm going to put one in your boyfriend. And then I'm going to drag you home." 1. Bear stood up by the guardrail. He let out a low, vibrating growl that rattled in his chest. 2. Mark drew his pistol. Bang! The shot didn't come from Emily's rifle, and it didn't come from Mark's pistol. It came from the snowbank. Mark's right shoulder exploded in a spray of red mist. He screamed, dropping the gun, spinning around and falling to his knees. Emily gasped, spinning toward the guardrail. Benjamin was awake. He was propped up on one elbow, his face a mask of sheer agony, his own sidearm, the one he hadn't used since the cabin, smoking in his hand. "She said no," Benjamin rasped. Mark groaned, clutching his shoulder, looking at Benjamin with wide, shocked eyes. You were dead." "Hard to kill," Benjamin wheezed. He slumped back into the snow, the gun slipping from his fingers. Emily didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, not to Benjamin, but to Mark. She kicked the pistol away from him into the deep snow. Mark looked up at her, face pale, teeth gritted. "Em, I'm hurt. Help me. You're a nurse." Emily looked down at the man who had controlled her life for 3 years, the man who had made her feel small, weak, and afraid. She looked at the blood seeping between his fingers. "I'm off duty," she said, cold and flat. She turned her back on him and ran to Benjamin. "Benjamin!" She fell to her knees beside him. His eyes were open, staring at the sky. He was smiling. "Did I get him?" "Yes," she sobbed, pressing her hands over the wound in his chest to stop the air from sucking in. "Yes, you got him. Stay with me." Tired, Emily. So tired. "No sleeping!" she screamed. She looked at the black truck. It was running. It had a heater. "Bear!" she commanded. "Watch him!" She ran to the truck. She climbed into the driver's seat. It was massive, smelling of stale smoke and Mark's cologne, a scent that used to terrify her. Now, it just smelled like victory. She threw it into gear and drove it over to them. She jumped out, leaving the door open. "We have to get you in," she told Benjamin. "I can't lift you." "Adrenaline," Benjamin whispered. "Use the anger." She grabbed him under the arms. She screamed with the effort, her back straining, pulling him up. He tried to help, pushing with his legs, groaning in pain. They stumbled, fell against the running board, and finally, agonizingly, she shoved him into the passenger seat. She whistled for Bear. The dog hopped into the back, licking Benjamin's face over the headrest. Emily climbed into the driver's seat. She looked at Mark in the rearview mirror. He was still kneeling in the snow, clutching his shoulder, watching them go. He looked small, defeated. She put the truck in drive. "Where? Going?" Benjamin mumbled. "Hospital," she said, gripping the wheel. "And then, wherever you want." He reached out, his bloody hand finding hers on the gear shift. "Come with me," he whispered. Emily laced her fingers through his. "I'm already there." The thaw came 2 days later. The snow melted into dirty slush, revealing the scars of the land. In a private room at the VA hospital in Spokane, the machines beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. Emily sat in the chair by the window, watching the parking lot. Bear was asleep at her feet, his paws bandaged but healing. The door opened. A man in a suit walked in. Navy, high brass. He looked at the man in the bed, then at Emily. "He's going to make it," the officer said. "Tough son of a bitch. And the drive, it's enough. The network is being dismantled as we speak. Mark and his associates are in federal custody." Emily nodded, not looking away from the window. "Good." "You know," the officer said, shifting his weight, "he shouldn't have survived. Medically speaking. It's a miracle." Emily looked at the bed. Benjamin was sleeping, his face pale but peaceful. The lines of pain were gone. "It wasn't a miracle," she said softly. "It was teamwork." The officer placed a card on the table. "When he wakes up, tell him he's retired. For real this time. And, if you need anything, Miss Vance." "I have everything I need," she said. The officer left. Benjamin stirred, his eyes opened, finding her instantly. They were still grey, still sharp, but the ice in them had melted. "Hey!" he rasped. "Hey!" she smiled, reaching for his hand. "Did we win?" "Yeah," Emily said, squeezing his fingers. "We won." Benjamin closed his eyes, a contented sigh escaping his lips. "Good. Now, about that coffee." Emily laughed, and for the first time in years, the sound was completely free. Author's note: sometimes the storms we fear the most are the ones that lead us to exactly where we need to be. Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about what you do when the fear is screaming at you to stop. If you enjoyed Emily and Benjamin's journey through the ice and fire, please like this story, share it with a friend who needs a little courage today, and subscribe for more tales of survival, romance, and redemption. Stay wild.